Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson, your host and guide. So as always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information, share feedback, show suggestion, topic, ideas, anything at all. Today we have a show that's part of our MYTH Warriors series. And of course our MYTH Warriors series is where we are proactive. We are engaged in battle out there in the world, trying to discern, trying to determine and figure out what's real, what's accurate, what's a lie, a falsehood, a fallacy. So we're trying to look at concepts, ideas, and ask, is this credible? Is this something that is believable? Or is this just a myth? So our specific show topic is nobody can teach me who I am. Nobody can teach me who I am. And that quote and the show episode topic is from a world-renowned author, Chinua Achebe, who authored, of course, the seminal work of his career was Things Fall Apart. And if you have not read Things Fall Apart, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's very short. It's a fantastic book. It is a world classic. It was first written by Mr. Achebe, and then published. It was in 1958. But I have to tell you, it's one of those books that it stays with you, and it also is one of those books that, for me personally, and I mean I must have been, like a really young adolescent when I first read the book. That changes the way I think about the world. And of course, Mr. Achebe was one of the sort of first global modern African authors that challenged sort of the narrative of perceptions about that part of the world and sort of people's experience. And Mr. Achebe was Nigerian, and I just strongly encourage you. It's one of those sort of books on the classics, modern classics, that you certainly want to make sure that you have. If you haven't read it, and if you haven't read it in a while, pick it up and read it again. It is so interesting when you sort of compare it to, of course, and that's where a lot of the literature was looking at Mr. Achebe's work in light of sort of the pre-existing narrative of sort of life on the continent of Africa. So, everything from Joseph Conrad and The Heart of Darkness, and you have to explore within yourself some of the big questions that Mr. Achebe asked. And so this quote, and one of the reasons we picked it for MYTH Warriors, is so much about what Mr. Achebe was proffering to the world was basically, he had some other wonderful quotes where he said, if you don't like someone's story, write your own, right? And what he was trying to do was to encourage us as individuals, my interpretation, was to encourage us to sort of pick up our own, pens and shout from the rooftops who we are. In other words, don't let other people, define us, but we're going to define us. And so, again, Mr. Achebe passed away in 2013. But again, if you haven't read Things Fall Apart, start with that. If you haven't read anything else, and if you haven't read in a while, pick it up again. Because again, who are we? What does it mean? To be anything. But specifically, what does it mean from his perspective? To be African. and who defines that? And so what's so interesting with this Myth Warriors topic, and the quote that I selected, was that nobody can teach me who I am. And it is sort of this larger, again, my interpretation, narrative of his works, Mr. Achebe's works, where he's challenging, look, first, no one can teach me and no one can define who I am. And as you see in the show notes, this quote, nobody can teach me who I am, is part of a little bit larger quote, which reads, nobody can teach me who I am. You can describe parts of me, but who I am and what I need is something I have to find out myself. You can describe parts of me, but who I am and what I need is something I have to find out myself. It's something that we talk about in all of the different programs. And in a certain extent, it sort of underpins the foundational principles of everything that I do. And so, of course, I'm constantly sharing that we want to look at surpassing our goals, and I'm always coming back to the idea that we want to be pragmatic in the world as it is. We're often talking about what can we do, right? We're action oriented, and the idea of who are we, right? Who am I? Who are you? I don't know. It can be, I think, sometimes interpreted, especially in some of the more substantive areas, professional services that I engage and deliver. People will say, well, what's that have to do? It's sort of esoteric, or I need to talk about, my revenue issues. I need to talk about, these specific legal issues. Yes. My argument is, though, that all of those things take place within this larger context, and that the decisions that people make as leaders, managers, any type of decision-making authority is predicated on this question: who are you? Because if you don't have a sense of self that permits you to take risks, that permits you to make individual decisions, aware that other people, may not like the decision, may not like you, or already, do not like the decision or do not like you, and you're able to deal with that. So much of what we talk about with leadership, decision making, whether it's in a legal context, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in your professional life, it comes back to this core issue: who are you? And the inability for someone to be able to, if not articulate it, at least have their own understanding of who they are, and have the confidence that goes with that, and have the resilience that goes with that, is the core challenge when we look at decisions that have really poor outcomes, especially that are repeated, right? It's because somebody doesn't know who they are. It may be that they thought, well, I should be such and such type person, and it may be that that's what their family put expectations and told them who they should be. It may be that their culture or their community told them who they should be. It may be that the larger media and stereotypes told them who they should be. But if your self-identity is carved out of what somebody else provides you, right? Like they tell you, this is who you should be, this is what you should do, this is what you should think, then it's not your identity, it's theirs, right? And so this idea that we're asking, is it a myth that nobody can teach me who I am, or is it absolutely accurate? Is this a concept that we can say, hey, other people can teach me who I am? Of course they can, and they have. That's what we're exploring. And again, this is a difficult question in many ways. It's a big issue that, of course, if we were going to really delve into. It's it's a course. It's not just a one episode show. But on the other hand, it can be somewhat discomforting and painful for people. Here's the deal. Let's walk down sort of the two paths, right? I'm Robert Frost. Let's look and see. Okay, so path one, right? The two paths diverged in the woods. Okay, so option one, this is absolutely positively a myth. Okay, what's a myth? The topic. Nobody can teach me who I am. So if that's a myth and it's not true that no one can teach me who I am, then it would follow that it's true. Someone can teach me who I am. Okay. If someone can teach you who you are, then who is that? Is it a certain specific person that can teach you? Or is it anybody that comes along in your life that can teach you? And have you ever known somebody, they're sort of like a shapeshifter in terms of their personality. So I've known people like this. You're hanging out with somebody, and when you're hanging out with them and you meet them, you start hanging out, and let's say this is someone you meet when you're maybe younger, so you're not working, maybe you're just in school, and you meet them, and they say, oh, I love music, and you say, I love music too, and you say, I just love really, fast music to dance to. That makes me so happy. And then they say, I love it too. Yeah, I love dance music, fast dance music. Okay, great. So you're talking to them or spending time with them, and like, oh, this is so great. We love fast dance music. And a little bit later, weeks or months later, there you are, and you are, you see them, and they're saying how much they love slow music, and they're hanging out with different people, and it's almost like every time they change friends, then their whole personality changes, right? So they listen to different music, they wear different clothes, maybe they even change their hair, they have totally different interests and hobbies, because none of it's real. It's all of people like that are doing is adhering to the idea that someone else can teach them who to be, right? And they just run around, and if everybody else or somebody else or someone specific that they aspire to hang out with or spend time with decides this is the right music or this is the right food or this is the right fashion, and that's what they do. And then a few weeks or months later or whatever, then they'll find somebody else, and then they totally change and they become that person. As we have become older in life, I would like to say that I haven't seen that behavior, since I was a young person, but actually that wouldn't be accurate. I see it all the time, right? So somebody who has this personality trait, they just continue to shapeshift. Whoever they're around, that's who they claim to be, and then of course it's all transitory, because whenever that ends, then they just go to somebody else and sort of absorb their personality. And it's very difficult, because who are they? You don't know. You might have known them forever. They might be a relative, and you've known through your whole life, and you're still like, who are you? I don't know. And my argument would be, I don't think they know either. I think when you see people like that who are just sort of constantly having these massive changes in their expression of what they purport to be, right? I love this music. No, I like this food. No, I'm into this or that. And it's all just something that somebody else is doing. They're just followers. I would argue then it's very difficult for us on the outside, right? We're not them. We're not inside them. It's tough for us to know, who are they? And typically with people like that, when you observe them over time and they keep changing, it tends to be a negative. Most people in most parts of the world say, well, wow, I really don't want to hang out with them, or be married to them, or whatever, because it's so there's no real substance or authenticity. They just sort of morph into whoever it is that they're around or whoever they want to be, and it's very disconcerting. That's option one, that someone else can teach you who you are, right? The other option is that nobody can teach me who I am. And if that was accurate, right, so we're still two paths in the woods, we're trying to see which one. If this is accurate, okay, if it is not a myth, if it is accurate that nobody can teach me who I am, then that would lead to the logical question, then I have to teach me who I am? The onus is on me. The responsibility is 100% on me to teach me who I am. And that again can be disconcerting for people and may feel like that's a big burden. How am I supposed to teach me who I am? Isn't someone else responsible? Shouldn't I find someone of the same gender or and maybe the same national origin or the same religion or the same ethnicity or whatever, and then they'll just tell me or show me? If nobody can teach me who I am, then that means I guess I have to do it all by myself, which seems like it's a lot of work. And a lot of people would maybe argue, well, that's not real. I can have a role model, or maybe, we all know that families and family of origin and upbringing can have a huge impact on people, and we do. There's a lot of discussion and understanding about that. Yet, have you ever known someone where, even though it appears, at least, again, from the outside, because we're not inside the person, that they come from a family where everyone is, hardworking and law-abiding, and then the person comes out of that family, and they themselves are not hardworking and law-abiding, just sort of on their own. They make their own way in the world, sometimes in really amazingly wonderful ways, and sometimes in, not great ways. I certainly saw this practicing criminal law as an attorney. I'd have, sort of the stereotypical client you see in movies and on television, where the family seems to be just, the family of origin seems to be full of problems, multiple issues, and people with other criminal histories. And then that's your stereotype, right? Well, it makes sense then. But then I had many instances where I would have clients who had criminal challenges and criminal charges they were facing, and no one in their family at all had any of these issues. So there certainly are many instances where the person's behavior isn't just a 100% reflection of whoever they were around. Like we talked about option one. Option one, right? Somebody else is teaching you who you are. So I gave sort of an extreme example of those people who almost have no ability to express whatever their actual ideas and thoughts and personality traits are, because they just constantly just pretend to be whatever the people around them are. That's an extreme example, but it was certainly to illustrate the point. On the other option, we're looking down this other path. If nobody can teach me who I am, then that means I have to teach me. And is there any evidence to show that either occurs or that that's possible? And if nobody could teach us who we are, right, then how would we teach ourselves? How would we do that? And when you look at the longer quote in the show notes, right? So nobody can teach me who I am. You can describe parts of me, but who I am and what I need is something I have to find out myself. Now, that longer quote, of course, gives some clues to help us, again, try to move to our conclusion of whether or not this is a myth or accurate, potentially, where it says, you can describe parts of me. So I think maybe that we might sort of go to this idea that, a male young child has male adult role models that sort of help with that, maybe that part of who he is. And that's part of him. But the totality, right, who I am and what I need, the longer quote argues, is something I have to find out for himself. So maybe just being a male is part of who he is, but that's not the totality of who he is as an individual. And that there can be parts of who we are where we do draw information, we have role models, we can learn and sort of get an advantage, right? If somebody has lessons to teach us and we can avoid making those same mistakes ourselves, that can be really helpful. But one of the things that I had gone socially out with some people a little while ago, and they have sort of some adult children who are like, early 20s, transitioning all the way into, their full adulthood. So they're out of the home and they're in school or working, and, not in a different state, from where their parents live. And they were talking about sort of, the challenge of that, right? And you can read about that. There's a lot of research that sort of empty nest when people, the family's been together, and then the decades go by, and now their little birds have left the nest. And to me, it relates somewhat to this idea that even though the family may have done everything that they could to, healthy and well-rounded and a strong sense of self, that they understand that the person still is going to go out into the world and at some level write their own narrative, right? They're going to find out for themselves totally who they are. Now, they're going to take with them a lot of what they've learned. Parts of who they are have been hugely influenced, but they still are going to sort of carve their own path at some level, and that's sort of this parts of the discussion we were having. And when I look at this show and was working through creating it, I think that lends some credence to this idea, right? That nobody teaches me, I think we could say, all of who I am, right? That we get information from all kinds of places, but this individual path you're on and I'm on, if this is not a myth, then we have responsibility, again, that word, and we have choices, but that means that we get to teach ourselves. Who am I? What do I need? And how do I find that out? We've done many programs where we talk about, with so many of the things that we've got to invest in, we've got to go, inside ourselves. So we have to find our quiet place. We've got to go and just listen to our own thoughts. And I strongly encourage that. Again, this is a quiet place where we're listening to our own thoughts. It may be part of a meditation practice or not, but it's about, you need to just sit somewhere quiet and listen to your own thoughts. And begin to be honest with yourself. The larger quote asks, it talks about, what I need is something I have to find out for myself. Well, what do I need? We all have sort of the basic, right, fundamental needs. We need nutrition, and we need hydration. We need, ideally, depending where we live, some type of shelter. But beyond that, some of these morph into sort of need/wants. But what makes you happy? Who are you? And there's I did a program about regrets, and I shared, and I've shared on many different occasions, I actually have very few regrets, if any. I really don't have any major regrets in life, because sort of everything that I've dreamed of and wanted to do, I've gone out and done. Now it's not all been done the way in my fantasy when I dreamed about it would be necessarily. Some of it's been just bigger and more than I ever thought it would be, and some of it didn't really work out at all, but I did do it. And I've gotten to experience a lot of the things that I've dreamed about doing. So I honestly can't say, oh, I look back and I wish I had, taken this chance or gone to this place or, taken this risk. I did take all the risks, probably more than some would say, is rational, but I don't have regrets. And one of the things when we look at this idea and we're asking ourselves, nobody can teach me who I am, as I've gone out and done corporate education, keynote speaking events around the world, I've worked with many people who work in organizations, and they went into that job because it was told to them that they were going to do that. Sometimes it's a family business where literally their family was like, this is what we do. We work at this place. Our family, started this, and we still, you know, do it. And some people in that situation, it's great because it turns out that being in that industry or in that organization is exactly what brings them, joy. On the other hand, there are people who that really wasn't what they wanted, but they did it because, the combination of they didn't want to disappoint other people. They were told this is what they had to do. Also, it was easy in some ways because, it was right there. They didn't have to go out and compete for some job or, with strangers. I mean, it was just there. All they had to do was just say, okay, and sort of show up. And the argument that I would say lends credence to this being not a myth is that even though from the outside a lot of people would argue, well, gee, how lucky are you to be born into something like that, right? But if it wasn't for that person, the totality of who they probably are, it's not going to work. And I've even seen it in my own family, where there were family businesses that were handed down to my grandparents' generation, and then my grandparents' generation should hand down to my parents. And these things don't always go well, largely because it's so dependent on the person. One person can be in an industry, again, in a business, and say, I love this. This is the greatest thing ever. I'm so happy. This is great. Another person can say, it's okay, but it's not really what I would have done if I had all my options of what would have made me happy. And so I've seen that in my professional life. I've seen it in my personal life. And I also have continued in so many of the programs that we do to have people struggle with their own, I guess, self-approval and their worry about what other people's expectations are, what society's expectations are, their concerns and fear about, well, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. No one's ever done that. And they self-sabotage. We've also done programs on, mentoring and how, even though my assertion is that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity if you have that availability, that it's not necessarily required for someone to be able to go out into the world and pursue their aspirations. That if I don't have a mentor, then I shouldn't, in my analysis, give up and say, well, I'll just have to wait until I find one. Well, I don't think that's accurate at all. I mean, it would be great if you have one, and if you do, that's wonderful. But if you don't, then that's okay. Just mentor yourself. How do you do that? Well, if you don't have anyone to ask, right, if you don't have anyone to teach you, right, then you go out and you read. And the beauty of knowledge, especially with the technology we have, is everything is so accessible. So I'm concluding that this is not a myth. I'm concluding that it's not a myth and that it's rather accurate, that nobody can teach me who I am. And again, when we look at the two options, option one, somebody can teach me or everybody can teach me, or option two, nobody can. If nobody can teach me who I am, then it does mean that I have this extra responsibility, burden, some would call it, to try to figure out who I am and what I'm interested in and what I'm passionate about and how I can improve. Yet it opens up so many potential positive outcomes. To be your own person. To feel that your life matches what your vision of your life should be. And that's in your own imagination. It's in your own mind. You have the right to define yourself. You have the right to decide. And the beauty is, you're the expert. You're the expert on who you are. I'm again, things fall apart again, which is Chinua Achebe's sort of literally like a classic. Is one of those works that I read it and it works on so many levels. It's an excellent narrative, and of course it hits on sort of these big issues, colonialism, things of that nature, but just on a personal issue, on a personal individual level. It gets you thinking, which is the aspiration of all, art and literature. And one of the reasons in so many other programs, I encourage you, I implore you, I beg you, spend the time in investigating in the world ideas, because without exposure to different ideas, then you won't be able to begin to understand really potentially who you are, what you're interested in. And the beauty of this not being a myth is that when you take responsibility for yourself, for teaching yourself, and you begin to experience positive outcomes in your life. Now, you're going to always have negative things that happen because that's just the nature of life, right? Like, I could be making, really good choices. I think I'm doing so well, and oh my goodness, there's a natural disaster, and then I break my leg, and then, who knows? Like, so, I mean, it's not going to sort of inoculate you from just regular, life up and down, and horrible things happen, but it will begin to give you a framework for analyzing the things that you can make decisions about. And it also, it's a snowball effect. It feeds itself. So if you begin to teach yourself and you start having positive outcomes, and that sort of reinforces the presumption that, okay, maybe I was going in a good direction. And more positive outcomes reinforce more, confidence. And so it's a really positive snowball effect. And over time, hopefully, you begin to see, there are no limits. There's no ceiling. There's no wall. What do you want to do? What are you interested in? And even if maybe you say, I want to be an astronaut, I love it, but I'm, 62 years old, and and I'm out of shape, and I have some disabilities, and okay, but I bet you can maybe write about it, or create art about it, or share knowledge about it, or just become an expert about it because you know so much, and you can go meet other like-minded people. And there's a way to express whatever those interests are, whatever those potential little stirrings of passion are. There's a way. Why not? Why not teach yourself? Why not take the time you have here on this, I was going to say planet, but, on any planet, to do this. So it's a little frightening, but it's not a myth. It's accurate. Nobody can teach me who I am, and nobody can teach you who you are. That means you have to teach yourself. It means you got some work ahead of you, but you're going to also have some amazing rewards. I really thank you so much for joining me. And again, I encourage you, if you haven't read Things Fall Apart in the Wild, please do so. If you never read it, pick it up. There's, sort of a world of art and literature and things that I certainly would argue are necessary for beginning to get everything out of this life that you can. And so we should all, I certainly continue to try to expose ourselves to these works that are literally by some of the most, gifted and brilliant people that have ever lived. So again, thank you for joining me. You can always come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information.